In this section, we'll be finding the solutions to a quadratic equation. And in the previous sections, we've factored quadratic equations, but we've never used the quadratic formula. Now I'm talking about the section in intermediate algebra. So if you haven't had intermediate algebra, you might want to go on over to the intermediate algebra section and see on how to factor quadratic equations. Okay, so let's take a look at an example. Now we're going to start with something general, and that is what the quadratic equation looks like in general. So by completing the square in a general setting, we will obtain the quadratic formula. Now if you've never completed the square before, this is probably a bad time to learn because, well, we're doing it in a general setting and we're not really working with any numbers. But this is your quadratic equation where A, B, and C are real numbers. So we might say that A, B, and C are elements of R. There's something that needs to be said though, that A cannot equal 0, right? Also, well, we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But what we want to do is we want to be able to come up with this. Okay, this is called the quadratic formula. And in order to do this, we just complete the square. So I don't know if you've ever completed the square or not. And if you don't know this, if you can't remember it, if you can remember how to complete the square, well, you can always get to this point. So we're just going to take our coefficients A, B, and C, plug them into our formula, and this is going to give our solution to the quadratic equation. So quickly here, we're going to try to complete the square. What we want to do is get a 1 as a coefficient. So I'm going to go through and multiply through by 1 over A all the way across. And that's going to give us AX squared over A plus BX over A is equal to, and I should say that we need to also move the C over to the right or subtract C from both sides. So that was something that I should have already said. Okay. So we multiply through by each term by 1 over A. Now remember, we're completing the square. We're going to derive up this formula right here. And so now we're left with X squared plus B over AX is equal to negative C over A. Okay, so our goal was to get a 1 out here in front by multiplying through by 1 over A. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add something to both sides. And that is, we're going to add a B over 2A quantity squared. Okay. Go ahead and rewrite negative C over A. So we're just adding B over 2A quantity squared to both sides. Okay. We can take this and rewrite this. You could think of this as like being K and then K squared. But this can actually be rewritten as X plus B over 2A quantity squared. All right. That's going to be this side right here. Now, if you multiplied this out, this is what you would get. is equal to, now what you want to do over here is just multiply all this out and get a single numerator and denominator. And when you do that, you should end up with b squared minus 4ac over 2a, right? So this would be b squared over 4a squared. You would get a common denominator, add the numerators. Well, this is what you should end up with right here. As you can see, here's the b squared right here, okay? See that? You would multiply the top by 4, the bottom by 4. This is where the 4 is coming from, because 2 squared is 4. Well, I'll let you work on that. All right, we got to move on here quickly. Now, we're solving for x in this problem. So that means that you have to square root both sides in order to get rid of this square. Okay, so if we square rooted both sides, right, that's going to eliminate this square right here. But when we do that, we have to go plus or minus. Right, we have to go plus or minus when we do this. So we're going to write plus or minus here. So this becomes x plus b over 2a plus or minus the square root of okay, I think, okay, this is a squared, so I left that off. That would be a squared here. And 2 would be 2 squared, and so that makes that a 4. So let me correct that. I was looking at that thinking something's not right. All right. So now we're left with b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. Now you can take this square root and split it up, square root the numerator, square root the denominator. When you square root the denominator, you square a 4, it just becomes 2, and when you square root a squared, it just becomes a. So we can actually rewrite this. And while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and take the b over 2a over here to the right, which makes it negative b over 2a. That's the way I see it, but technically you're subtracting b over 2a from both sides, so always keep that in mind. So this becomes b squared minus 4ac. Now remember, we split the square root up. We square rooted the top and square rooted the bottom. And when you square root a 4, you get 2 square root a squared. You get a. Okay. Now we can bring this together since we have a common denominator of 2a. This can be actually written as x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and the whole thing is over 2a. Okay. So that's how we derived up the quadratic formula. We just simply completed the square of the quadratic equation. All right. Now, we're going to be able to look at this part right here and tell whether it has a real solution, okay, or the solution has two real numbers, or it has one solution, just by looking at this underneath the radical. And we give this actually a name, and we'll talk about that in the next video. All right, so we're going to work out some examples in the next video. Okay, I'll see you there.